The people of this country hath had one barbarous custom amongst them. If any two be displeased, they expect no law, but bang it out bravely, one and his kindred against the other and his. They will subject themselves to no justice, but in an inhumane and barbarous manner fight and kill one another. There are some counties in Britain where there seems to be a castle in every town, on every hill, round every corner. Northumberland is such a place. Deep back into its history, it has faced raids from across the Scottish border and has been a land where families of one valley would feud with families of the next. So it's not surprising that every landowner would protect his property and every father defend his family. For 200 years there was a real boom in castle building. "800 years ago, a lord didn't have to go to the local council for permission to build, but he did have to seek the approval of the king. The lord owed allegiance to the king, and the castle was part of the king's rule over the country. From the air, you can see that castles like Dunstanburgh were built on good sites. They had to be built this way because a castle was constructed to guard or control a stretch of land. There would be little point in having a strong building on a poor site. So where would a lord build his castle? The lie of the land was very important. The castle needed natural protection and a good outlook. A castle built in a valley site would be very open to surprise attack from the hills behind it. But built at a point like this, it takes full advantage of the hills and steep slopes. Attacking armies would have great difficulty getting anywhere near without being seen. Here's just such a site at Norham Castle on the Scottish border. The land falls away steeply to the river, and before the trees were planted, there would have been views right across to the border. Raiders would have had to approach in full view of the castle. Look west from this castle keep, and there is a view straight up the village street. The place has changed over the centuries, as all places do, but this castle was built to defend the land and the people who lived on it. This site gave its owner a powerful position from which to control the community. But what about this castle at Edlingham? It's in a valley, and the camera is looking down on it from a hilltop. Fear of attack was probably not the main reason for it being built. There is a church and village nearby, and it is more likely that the Lord wanted to keep scattered farms and a peasant workforce under his control. A castle gave power. From the tower of Warkworth Castle, the owner would feel a real sense of physical control as he looked over the land, and he would know that he had political power over vast stretches of countryside. This view is spectacular, and would certainly have allowed early warning of invasion from the sea. But more important to the owner of Warkworth would be to know who was coming in and out of the harbour so that taxes could be collected. Turning round, we see how this castle overlooks the village, the church, and the river. Even though many of the houses will have been built after the castle, we can feel that the castle rules this area. So most castles were built both to control the land and give security. The deep valley surrounding Aden Castle offers very good natural protection, and because attackers didn't have weapons to shoot from a distance, they would have no choice but to climb up the steep slopes and fight at close quarters. But why build a castle amongst low-lying farming land like this? Well, Belsae was probably more important as an administrative centre of a wealthier state than as a stronghold against invaders. There couldn't be anything much better than a coastline to give a natural defence, but the strongest and highest towers of this castle stand well inland, and this suggests it was from the land and not the sea that attacks were expected. When, in the 20th century, someone is buying a house, they may look at a ground plan first, because there will be certain things they want in their home: a kitchen, a bathroom, a living room, a garage. The richest of lords, like the modern homeowner, might have had a detailed plan and would have known how much his castle was likely to cost him. He would want a good site, strong protective walls, a strong keep, and rooms in which his family, retainers and servants could live. But we have to remember that castles grew over a number of years. They were changed and added to. The two mounds in this field are a feature of most castles. Castles are built on either natural or man-made mounds. This one at Elsdon is man-made. It's a very striking example of an early motte and bailey castle. And round the top of these banks there would have been a wooden palisade, a fence. This may well have been a more important part of its defence than the steep banks and ditches themselves. From high up on the motte, one can look down into the bailey, a sort of flat courtyard that would have been filled with domestic buildings. It was important that all parts of the castle could be seen from the motte, and that they would be covered by bowmen's arrows. Attacking a castle like this wouldn't have been easy. At Elsdon, the wooden palisades disappeared long ago. In other castles, we can see very clearly the stone curtain walls which took their place. However sophisticated castle building became, that basic shape remained. A castle had to have a motte and it had to have a bailey. And to most of us, it wouldn't be complete if it didn't have a moat, though it depended on what sort of land the castle was built as to whether it was a dry moat or one filled with water. But there is one thing most of us know about a castle. It will have a tower or keep. The simplest form of keep was a square or circular wall enclosing a number of small buildings. More common are keeps like this one at Norham, which inside have a large hall and several other rooms. Later these developed into tower keeps, which, like a modern house, provided a living space for a large family and their servants. Perhaps the best way to understand all these elements and the way they fit into the whole castle is to walk slowly round towards the front entrance, like a medieval lord surveying his property. Looking up to the huge structure of the castle, the owner would know that most of the people who lived in the village would owe allegiance to him. In these parts, it was his authority that ruled. The shield of his family, the Percy family, made that clear to all who passed. From the back of the castle, follow this long curtain wall built on steep banks, and you will be aware of the castle's strength and of the great expense of quarrying stone and carrying it to the site. Such a long wall needs protection, and from these towers soldiers could guard the whole of its length. These arrow loop windows, wide inside but very narrow outside, let a defender fire on an attacker without any real danger to himself. It would have taken several years and £5,000 or £6,000 to build a castle like this. It wasn't cheap, for the richest knights would earn only £600 to £800 a year. To crenellate a wall, that is, to build battlements on the top, a license had to be obtained from the king. On the southern front, the lord would see the deep moat and the great gateway. Every castle would have a defended gateway, though they were not all built to the same design and were not all the same size. With the drawbridge down and the portcullis up, he would be able to walk through into the bailey and look up at the huge keep. The bailey would have been full of stables, outhouses and worksheds. There might even have been garden plots to supply vegetables to those living in the castle. This castle was a centre of power and control. It was also a family's home. Steep banks, deep moats and strong walls. These were the important features of a castle that would make life very difficult for any intending attacker. If hostile forces did get into the moat, they could be watched wherever they went. If they tried to dig under the castle, and this was the most feared form of attack, they would still be seen, and missiles and stones could be hurled down on them. There was little chance they could climb up the banks without heavy loss of life. The entrance to Prudder Castle is through a barbican, a narrow and easily defended passageway. Because it stuck out from the gatehouse and the main body of the castle, it provided protection against sudden attack. If an attacker did get through this first line of defence, then they would be trapped in direct line of fire from the gatehouse. It's no wonder that Prudder Castle withstood a fierce attack by Scots in 1170. Every castle had a gatehouse, and in many, like this one in Norham, there was a gap in the stonework across which a drawbridge would be slung. There were two weapons with which a determined attacker might breach a castle wall. They were fire and stones slung by throwing machines. Increasing the strength of the walls was one way that such attacks might be resisted. Not only are the walls thicker at the bottom, where an attack was most likely to take place, but the sloping stonework would deflect heavy stones. But even if attackers did get into the gatehouse, there were still more obstacles. The curved roof gave some protection against fire, and the way through could be blocked by a very heavy portcullis, which could be lowered through slots like these. However much the size and strength of towers and gatehouses might impress us, it was the long walls between them that were the most crucial part of a castle's defence. They provided the enclosure which protected the family when it was under siege. Behind these crenellations or battlements, there would be a walkway on which soldiers could patrol. In some castles, a wooden structure would be extended over the front of the wall. We can still see the post holes. These hoards, as the wooden structures are called, allowed a direct view to the base of the wall. Later castles had stone versions of these built into towers and gatehouses. On this tower, we can see the slots through which heavy objects would have been hurled at the attackers below. By the end of the 15th century, gunpowder had made the castles easy targets, and as society changed, many of them began to fall into ruin or became just family dwellings. In walking round a castle, it is worth taking a close look at a single wall. the upturned V shape in the stonework? Why is there a door halfway up a wall? What are the big slabs of stone? Grooves that are carved to a point in a wall usually mark the roof line of an old building. The doorway probably led to a platform and staircase. These disappeared long ago, but the holes and long groove are where the wooden support and stair posts fitted. This wall inside the keep of Norham Castle is full of clues about how stone was used in building and rebuilding. Where the outer stonework has disappeared, we have a very good picture of the construction used by medieval castle builders. There were carefully cut stones on the outside and rough stones on the inside. But what is a fireplace doing so high up in this wall? It's worth thinking about family life in a castle and the building when it had 3 or 4 stories of rooms. Somewhere near this fireplace, one would expect to find the holes where the floor beams used to be. Builders over the centuries have tried many different ways of constructing a window in a wall. It's not as easy as it looks, because a window weakens the wall above it. In this castle, an arch of stones is used to add strength. Look at the way flat stones have been used over the chute and fireplace. As we walk round Aden Castle, a smaller castle than many, we see all the evidence of its defensive role in corner towers and curtain walls. But what is this piece of stonework? It's part of the castle's toilet facilities, and it reminds us that castles were homes, although hygiene was probably not quite what it is today. Aden in many ways feels more like a house than a castle. It is small, and apart from the enclosing walls, it is less heavily defended. It is what we call a fortified manor house. But if a house was built for people, provision had to be made for horses as well, for the horse was the only form of transport. These stables were strongly built of stone against the dangers of fire. The horse was a valuable possession which had to be looked after well. People had to be looked after too, and this meant there had to be kitchens and somewhere to eat the food and entertain friends. This hall was on the first floor, as many were. And at the upper end would be a small private chamber called a solar. A fine fireplace would be a feature of an important hall like this one, and would be more impressive than this kitchen fireplace, which has a piece cut out of the stonework so that servants could get to the oven at the back. It had to be wide enough to take a roasting spit. Food was not always cooked near the hall. In some of the larger castles, the ovens might be in the bailey. In Aden, they are near the hall, and originally would have had at least one large decorated fireplace. In the wall, we can see signs of places for keeping doves. We can see cupboards, shelves, and a waste chute. Another feature of many castles was a chapel, for religion was an important part of people's lives in medieval times. Chapels can often be recognized by rows of seats along one wall, a rounded roof, and sometimes some decorative arcading. The windows are heavily moulded and grooved to take glass mounted in lead frames. In a larger castle like Warkworth, it was the keep which housed the living quarters for the family. These plans of the inside of Warkworth Castle show just how many rooms there were in the keep, and though it is in ruins, we can identify the grandeur of the great hall. There is no feeling here of this being a military building, and great care has been taken to bring light into the room. There is a huge fireplace in the side wall, and at the end of the hall are doors to the kitchen and servant quarters, for lords and servants were well separated. To 20th century families, a castle like this might seem to be both cold and uncomfortable, but in medieval times it would provide good living for a lord and his family. Flying over the border castles of Northumberland, we appreciate their number and their size. They are just as impressive if we walk round them at ground level. We can see the strength of the building and feel something of the power and authority of their owner. But we can also have a sense of a castle as a home and a safe refuge in times of attack.